privacy in the press, next on 4. Africa, in times of plenty, food and water.
Breathing new life into the history books, John Romer tracks the changing fortunes of the lost world of Byzantium. Channel 4, Sunday at 8.
In half an hour, After Dark returns for a special edition with the paralysed policeman who met Diana for 20 minutes and has spent this week socialite Klaus von Bülow. That's After Dark, Britain's only live and open-ended discussion programme, in half an hour.
But now on 4, in a change to our advertised programme, Ray Snoddy presents a hard news special asking hard questions about privacy and the press.
Good evening. During the last 2 weeks, the press has been under the spotlight more than at any time in my life. Privacy, paparazzi, harassment, intrusion. My profession stands accused of having blood on its hands.
It would appear that every proprietor and editor of every publication that has paid for intrusive and exploitative photographs of her, encouraging greedy and ruthless individuals to risk everything in pursuit of Diana's image, has blood on his hands today. She talked endlessly of getting away from England, mainly because of the treatment that she received at the hands of the newspapers.
Hard words indeed, but are they deserved? And if they are, what can be done about it? I first presented Hard News 8 years ago. 8 years during which royalty, showbiz, and ordinary people alike have all been bearing the pain. By an extraordinary irony, one of our first complainants brings us full circle. Elle Spencer, newly married in 1989.
Today carried a double-page feature which showed photographs of the interior of Viscount Althorp's home. They included shots of the kitchen, the hall, and living room. There was even a large picture of his bedroom.
And this was the bedroom. Now, the only way they could get a picture through this window is by putting their lens right up against it, by coming into this area, which is private property. Everything inside this fence is private. It's my home. Nobody's welcome here unless invited. I know exactly what they were up to. They were not content with the story as it stood. They wanted to make it juicier, nastier, and they didn't want somebody who they saw as a privileged young man having the happy time that he deserved. They wanted to get back. They wanted to bring me down, and they wanted to make Victoria's life a misery.
St. James.
St. James Hospital.
People trying to get bits of information, photographs, which we didn't want to release, which Russell Harty wouldn't have wanted released.
There were physical problems, logistical problems in actually getting round reporters and journalists.
People being dressed up as a medical student came and asked me if I could have the notes of Mr. Harty to give to the professor.
What, a journalist?
Yes, he was dressed as a doctor with a medical student badge.
I think if there hadn't been that pressure of press people trying to interview and take photographs of him or get any information at all, that he would have stayed in hospital and might not have suffered the liver collapse, which he eventually did.
To that extent, it killed him. Do you think that?
It didn't help.
Terror tot Jonathan Hunt was last night dubbed Britain's naughtiest kid after wrecking his parents' home.
Cutting off his own ear.
And killing the cat.
I was absolutely shocked. I just couldn't believe what they'd done. They'd just done a hatchet job on my little boy's already sad little life. People actually believe what the Sun write.
The story really caught some Sun readers' imaginations, and they weren't slow to let Mrs. Hunt know what they felt about her and her little boy.
I can tell you what to do with a little bastard.
I would like to be in a position to sue the Sun for libel, But unfortunately, its simple legal aid is not available for ordinary people that have no means.
On the Monday morning after the disaster, the Daily Mirror printed this horrific picture of the crush at Leppings Lane. At the time of going to press, the papers had no idea of the identities of the people shown in this picture. One clearly identifiable victim was 19-year-old Gary Church.
The Mirror printed a picture of them all in the cage and Gary's right in the middle of it. That was wicked. Animals.
But now the press got its comeuppance. The sustained boycott of the Sun and Liverpool hit circulation when the paper cast unsubstantiated slurs on Liverpool fans.
The truth. Some fans picked pockets of victims. Some fans urinated on the brave cops. Some fans beat up PC giving Kiss of Life.
I couldn't believe it. It was one of disbelief. It was as though someone, on the day my mother had died, had come to my house and started saying terrible things about my mother and my family.
And Hillsborough was one of the cases cited by David Mellor, then a Home Office minister, when on Hard News he issued his now famous warning to the press.
I do believe the press is drinking, the popular press is drinking in Last Chance Saloon, actually.
After David Mellor said that to me at Christmas 1989, the press started to clean up its act. The old Press Council was replaced by a gleaming new body, the Press Complaints Commission. Public inquiries came and went, the government threatened legislation, the newspapers were suitably cowed. But gradually through the 90s, the press began to fight back, often by focusing on the private lives of its accusers. One by one they fell, as did plans for legislation, harsh codes of conduct, or even just a body to regulate the press from the outside. By the mid-1990s, they were back to their old ways.
Even now, when I tell people about what happened to me, you know, sort of friends or whatever, that didn't know what happened at the time, they just come back with, well, why did it happen to you? I mean, what was why you?
Kate Scanlon's quiet existence on the tiny island of Lundy was rewritten by the press into a series of unbelievably lurid headlines. What propelled her onto the front page was simply her relationship with a married man.
The feeling of being hunted, I don't think anyone can quite understand that unless they've been through it. And it's not only for myself, but it was everybody that ever has been involved with me.
And just a few months ago, a year on from those first headlines, the papers were still pursuing her.
I mean, a lot of the headlines you have to take as a joke, otherwise you never retain your sanity. But the one that really got to me was an article. The headline was Jolly Roger, and it was all about my sexual antics at sea. And I think that upset my father, and that just scarred the last 6 months of his life.
It's years since Michael Cashman left EastEnders, but nothing's changed in the way the tabloids treat him. His ordinary life would never sell papers, so they try and spice it up through harassment and entrapment.
One summer's evening, there was a knock at my door, and I answered it, and there were two kids there. And they asked me for a fiver. And afterwards, I used some rather impolite language and said, you know, on your bike, you're not getting a fiver. And they looked at me and they said, we don't want your fiver anyway, because those two fellows gave us a tenner to ask. And sat opposite, on the other side of the street, were two guys in a car, and one guy with a telephoto lens.
2 years ago, the tabloids returned to a favourite victim. Having mauled Earl Spencer, his wife became the better story. When she was admitted to hospital with an eating disorder, the press followed, an appalling invasion of privacy.
Well, the question I have to ask really is how you can justify using a mother of four's psychological problems to sell your newspaper. My wife has a right to privacy, and she has a right to peace and a chance to cope with a very stressful situation for her and for my family. But she doesn't deserve the interruptions and the viciousness of the tabloids.
Nothing has changed. It's the same gang up to the same grisly tricks. And the only thing that will change is the sanction of law. And if they don't understand that, certainly the public do.
According to many, the press has come full circle, back to its worst excesses. Indeed, in the very edition announcing the death of Diana, the People carried grossly intrusive photos of the actress Sarah Lancashire. If they are the sins of commission, there are also sins of omission. Look at this report of Earl Spencer's oration. Or this. Did you spot what was missing from his text in both papers?
She talked endlessly of getting away from England, mainly because of the treatment that she received at the hands of the newspapers.
Presumably, the People and Sunday Mirror didn't feel their readers needed to read that, or...
I don't think she ever understood why her genuinely good intentions were sneered at by the media, why there appeared to be a permanent quest on their behalf to bring her down.
Powerful stuff not to report. The Mirror Group told us yesterday.
It was just coincidence that the two Mirror Group Sundays decided not to run Earl Spencer's speech in full. We decided to give a positive flavour rather than look at the darker side of his words.
But the fact remains that the People and the Sunday Mirror were the only two national newspapers not to include Earl Spencer's stinging criticism of the press.
I mean, I never woke up and said, I know what to do today, let's go and reduce the princess to tears. Once she was there in your viewfinder, you know, you were making money. She was on holiday in Spain and she decided to come home, not for any other reason other than the holiday finished. It was about 200 yards, I think, she had to walk, and we were just taking photographs all the way. And I was just walking backwards, taking photographs, and I thought we were going for a door, but we weren't, we were going into a lift. And she just grabbed hold of me and pulled me out of there. Out. And that was it, really.
Out. O-U-T, out.
Mark Saunders was one of the most persistent of paparazzi. Now retired, he used to scrutinise every detail of Diana's life. She was the most lucrative target.
I think that it's a question of money, really. The pictures are taken to make money.
What's the most you've ever made from a photograph?
From one photograph? I don't know.
10,000, 20,000 more?
60, 70,000. If you take in all the worldwide sales.
From one photo?
For one frame.
With the public backlash, many paparazzi have suddenly become camera shy. Not an option this man allows the people he so enjoys chasing.
There's a definite buzz to it. Literally the second that you finish taking the pictures is the most exhilarating. At that precise moment in time, that's it. You've achieved what you set out to do, and there's a great sense of satisfaction.
It's a celebrity safari, stalking the watering holes of the rich and famous.
We drive around, we look at various restaurants in certain areas of London that we know that are frequented by various celebrities. You go there and you have a look and you see if there's any interesting cars, i.e. any chauffeurs, any number plates that you recognize, that you know that drive certain people. And if you're there, then you wait.
And what about how close you need to get to your target?
It can be from as close as I am right now to you, or 50 meters, 100 meters, or about, let's say, a distance of a football field.
Well, the end result you were aiming for was a sellable picture, but you would go as far as you felt you needed to go.
Like sneaking a shot from a hidden position, catching their prey unawares.
You climb up trees and get in bushes to take pictures of Sylvester Stallone or, you know, Madonna, Richard and Judy, you know, whoever.
And what about trespass? I mean, you talk about, you know, trespassing onto Twickenham and hiding there to get photographs.
Trespass. trespass. Never really come across that.
It's private property.
It wasn't trespass to me.
But it was private property, and you knew
It's
you
easy
weren't
to say
supposed to
that
be
now,
there.
isn't it? Well, there was no big sign saying, you know, you are not allowed to go past this point.
Bribery is not beyond them either. They'll pay chauffeurs and waiters to betray secrets, and the general public have been happy to do business with them.
We went all over the world doing this job. We went all over the world asking people if we could use their gardens or their front rooms. And I never ever remember anyone saying no. And I never remember anybody criticising me. And the week before Diana's death, I don't remember anybody looking at the pictures of her and Dodie on those yachts in the south of France and saying, this is wrong. All I remember everybody saying is, can we have more?
If there wasn't such a great interest from the public, we wouldn't be supplying this type of picture. We'd all be doing something different.
But I mean, can I put another analogy to you again? I mean, that's precisely what drug pushers say.
Again, I don't think it's quite as strong. I mean, what we supply is not addictive.
Is it not? Has it not become addictive? Is that not precisely how it's...
Yeah, maybe you're right, maybe you're right. I never really thought about myself as a drug pusher.
If they're the dealers on the street, surely the Mr. Biggs, safe in their offices, are the tabloid editors. They feed the public craving without ever dirtying their hands.
There have been a few situations with certain celebrities involved that the papers officially could not afford to be seen to send their own staff photographers there, and have said to us, well, if you're there and if you get something, by all means, you know, we'd be very interested to show us, but you're not there officially for us.
You take that to mean that if you turn up with a picture, they'll buy it?
Yes.
But they're trying very hard to distance themselves from you at the moment, aren't they?
Well, it's all very convenient to do that at the moment, obviously. No one wants to be associated with what we do for a living.
And will continue to do. Their view seems to be not they must mend their ways, but simply keep their heads down and ride out the storm. And when the public craving returns, the paparazzi will be back on the trail.
What was the point of taking the photographs? To sell them, to make money. Because the world wanted to see the pictures. I mean, you know, you're putting it onto us. But we're just talking about what most photographers do all the time.
Briberies, lies, you know, trespass and theft.
Sounds like an everyday day in Fleet Street to me.
We will be happy to calculate your tax, but don't forget to return your completed forms within the next 3 weeks. So get your skates on.
Welcome back. In the wake of the outcry over how the press treated Princess Diana, the pressure is on for something to be done. The newspaper industry would argue that its regulatory body, the Press Complaints Commission, is more effective than its predecessor, the Press Council. A code of practice has been drawn up for all journalists, and errors are more readily corrected than in the past. But the very purpose and existence of the PCC is under scrutiny as never before. Sarah Spiller talks to its critics.
The Press Complaints Commission is about as useful as a decapitated condom, and I wouldn't like to have one of those in my hands.
Where I think there is a crisis is that the system of self-regulation is at least partially in the hands of the people who are committing the atrocities.
This is the Bible of the PCC, their 18-point code of practice for the press. Its boast that, framed by editors for editors, it provides a firm set of ground rules based on robust common sense.
It's not enforceable, it's not a law, it's a wishy-washy code, no one has to take any notice of it. Editors don't when their circulation is at stake. Even the wording is weasel, because it only applies, for a start, to the action of journalists employed by the editors. It doesn't apply to the paparazzi. Editors buy their photographs, but they are not even theoretically covered by the code. It does speak of any invasion of privacy being justified here if editors reasonably believe it to be in the public interest.
What do you make of that?
That's the coach and horses, isn't it? It doesn't provide any compensation. You won't get a penny from the PCC. They are there as, I think, a confidence trick.
At the end of the day, it's a body funded by the industry that will use this language to let people off.
Mike Jemson helps those who suffer at the hands of the papers. He believes the PCC is little more than a gentleman's club, an unholy alliance between the great, the good, and newspaper editors.
We had a woman where she wouldn't talk to the press. So the reporters walked around her house, calling out, "We know you're a whore, we know you're a prostitute," so that all the neighbours could hear, trying to get her to come out and talk to her. Now, journalists will deny doing that, and there's nothing really in the code that says that that's an offence.
The tabloids live by the philosophy of intrusion, and the philosophy of intrusion is far worse than any particular incident of a snatch photograph or climbing over someone's garden wall or whatever it may be. It's this terrible belief that you have a right in the name of the people. They always say in the name of the people, like the secret police in a communist country.
I mean, one of the problems of the last 10 days has been that all the tabloid editors have gone to ground.
This week, the editor of the Daily Telegraph was not alone in breaking press ranks to attack the tabloids.
I think it's ludicrous that we have a profession, an industry, that is devoted to making other people accountable and in favour of openness. And at the first sign of trouble, the people who are responsible for it hide under their duvets.
And the row is not just about tabloid editors failing to face their critics. It goes to the heart of the press watchdog body and those who sit on it, the likes of Sir David English, editor-in-chief of Associated Newspapers.
How can a man like Sir David enforce it when this is the headline his paper ran last week? This is a grotesque intrusion into the privacy of the Prince of Wales. It's impossible to imagine that they could have known whether or not Charles wept bitter tears of guilt. But perhaps even more important than that, suppose they did know that he wept bitter tears of guilt. What business is it of them? What right do they have to intrude in that way? And there's Sir David sitting there as the respectable gentleman who's telling us how we should regulate ourselves. It's like inviting Jerry Adams to be the chairman of the committee that tries to verify the IRA ceasefire. It's a ludicrous situation.
The real signal that there's been a sea change is if he were to lose his job. He can't really be sacked, but he ought to resign.
The charge against the PCC is that it lacks bite. It needs stronger powers.
We're here to ITC they don't get away with it.
Along the lines, perhaps, of this body, the ITC, which regulates commercial television.
We've got a variety of penalties we can impose, from the simple publication that a company's been in breach of the code, and not many broadcasters like the embarrassment of that publicity, to asking the broadcasters to apologise, and we can fine them, we can shorten their licences, or ultimately revoke their licences if they have done something extremely serious or an accumulation of very serious episodes.
We've got to show that getting things wrong is going to hurt. If the code of conduct is tightened up, which it needs to be, and if it's then breached, we ought to see newspapers being fined and proper compensation given to the victims.
But for some, even this doesn't go far enough. Princess Diana's death has led to calls yet again for a new privacy law, provoking some soul-searching in the pages of the tabloids.
The way newspapers operate deserves a proper, deep and wide-ranging discussion.
Those whose knee-jerk reaction to the accident was to call for privacy laws to curb the press should think again.
I think there should be a civil law of privacy because all human beings in a free society have a right to privacy. And that seems to me that that right needs to be defended by law, not solely by law, but partly by law, because at present it is constantly breached.
The debate about a privacy law has echoed in the corridors of power for years, but drafting such legislation, many claim, is an impossible task. Is it difficult to draft a privacy law?
It's very easy. 40 American states have privacy laws. Most Canadian states have perfectly drafted privacy laws. On the back of an envelope this morning, I drafted a privacy law. I don't think it's the best draft in the world, but it's a start. Why is it that privacy is a value which is protected in every human rights treaty ever drafted? The answer to that is because it's a fundamental psychological necessity. And those who say that we should have no protection for privacy are lining up on the side of the torturers.
Whatever the solutions, most are agreed on one thing: the urgent need for an open public debate on the press and privacy, a debate in which everyone takes part.
I think we should harden up the rules. It has to change because there is a change of heart by the tabloids, and that means many things. Among others, it means a declaration of what they've done wrong, an apology for it, and an unequivocal resolution to forswear the weapons of emotional terrorism that they've been using against so many British people for years and years.
This evening, Sir David English issued the following statement.
My inquiries within and without the office left me totally convinced that the story was genuine and the editor was justified in using the headline. There has been no complaint from the Prince, the Palace or any royal official about this story, nor has there been any complaint to the Press Complaints Commission.
Naturally, we invited Lord Wakeham, chairman of the PCC, to take part in this programme. He declined. But now I can bring you some good news tonight from tomorrow's Sunday newspapers. Bridget Rowe, editor of the Sunday Mirror, tells her readers, I can give a firm and absolute assurance that we will respect the privacy of the young princes. We will work closely with the Press Complaints Commission to ensure that our newspaper, together with all the others, think carefully before we act. The News of the World is even more emphatic on its future policy on the paparazzi. The News of the World and every single newspaper in Britain bears some responsibility for supporting these people. We admit it. At one time or another, every newspaper has published the work of these so-called photographers, yes, including those posh and preachy broadsheets. Today, the News of the World calls a halt. We pledge not to publish any photograph unless it has been taken under the strict guidelines of the Newspaper Code of Practice. But of course, we'll judge those promises by the results. Good night.